Hi, it's Nicole Franklin again. Hello with an Epiphany conversation. Hi, I'm Nicole Franklin. I am joined by an esteemed panel of guests on a very, very serious topic of sexual slavery. It has been going on for centuries. We actually have someone who's an authority of early 20th century sexual slavery on with us tonight. But as everyone knows, we have a world event going on. Thank goodness it is a world event, because there were more than 200 girls in Nigeria who need our help, and we just really have to make sure that they know that we are here for them, but even more so, the terrorists know that there are laws, these are crimes, and they will be brought to justice. So on with me tonight is a very esteemed panel of guests, as I mentioned. And I just want to introduce you to some people who have been working in this field a very, very, very long time. And now that it has been brought into the forefront, we hope that more people who are now aware of the horrors of sexual trafficking, and listen to this number, 27 million are victims of trafficking. Most of this is sexual. About 18%, I read, is labor. But it's a wrong. It is not a birthright. So here we are in the U.S. I'm Nicole Franklin. We also have with us Taina Bien-Aimé. Taina is here. We're so honored with the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women. Hi, Taina.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Also in the U.S., we have Chelo Alvarez-Stehle. Chelo lives here, but I believe, Chelo, you're originally from Spain, and she has worked in this area for a very, very long time. Chelo has many films addressing this issue, especially where it arrives with immigration, that people are trafficked, and she has an interesting project taking it into the transmedia world, too. Next to her is Gabriela Böhm. And Gabriela has a very important film that's making the rounds right now, Raquel, A Marked Woman. And Gabriela will, again, talk to us about 20th century trafficking and how, unfortunately, it has continued. But hopefully, like we're saying, more awareness is behind it. We are honored to be joined also by Judge Sekou, who works out of New Jersey but travels a lot. And she lived in Nigeria for 3 years. So we're looking forward to her perspective tonight on what she sees happening as she deals in family court every day. So we get to hear some of those issues. From Thailand, where sex trafficking is a huge industry, is Kompalya Thunderbird, and I believe, Kompalya, you moved there to help eradicate this ill. So thank you for joining us. And we do have Nigeria on the line. The executive director, Victoria Ohaeri from Spaces for Change, will be joining us soon. Victoria is having a mild connection problem, but she will be in and out. She did send a note, though, because today is May 12th, and we had a video released today from the terrorist group that supposedly is holding the Nigerian girls. Supposedly it is a video of the girls. I do not believe this has been confirmed yet as of 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So I asked Victoria for a statement from Nigeria, and this is what she sent. In a new video released by the insurgent group today, Chelo, I believe is his name, the leader of the terrorist Islamic sect, claimed that the missing schoolgirls had converted to Islam and would not be released until all imprisoned members of the Boko Haram sect were freed. The Nigerian government has rejected the prisoner swap deal proposed by the insurgents. Meanwhile, peaceful protests are continuing in many parts of the country and likely won't stop until these girls are rescued and reunited with their parents. It is widely believed that the Nigerian army and other security agencies have not done enough to successfully rescue them. So I think we all agree on that. So Judge Sekou, I just want to start with you. You were going to give us a lay of the land of what you found in Nigeria that there were certain sections that may have perpetuated this activity with certain groups, but of course we know that this is not all of Nigeria. It's just a certain part is getting the spotlight right now.
Well, I think one of the confusing things that we're going to, I mean, I lived in Nigeria some 20-something years ago. I mean, before I had gone to law school. I was a teacher for 7 years before I was an attorney for 14. And in between that time, I traveled to Nigeria. And also the judges here in New Jersey and Essex County, our team leader, which is the head of the courts, was Nigerian. So he used to take a judge to Nigeria to counsel with the judges there every year. But with all that said, I think one of the things that's confusing in the statement that was made today is that the girls were converting to Islam. These girls are already Muslim girls. I don't understand what that statement was about. I don't know if he's saying they were converting to Sharia law, something different. But culturally, what they are doing, and I think what Nigeria, some of the more radicals are still under the belief that girls should not be educated. And that was the main, I think, issue around these girls, because I don't know if you remember, this particular school was closed, and the girls kind of decided that they were not going to go along with this issue with regards to their not having an opportunity for education, and went ahead to the school. And that's where they're abducted. Now, it took almost 2 weeks for this to actually get on the news here in New Jersey, I mean in the United States, only because of course, the internet gives us opportunity for immediate, if not instant communication, but it still took almost 2 weeks for it to really make our news cycle. So it is, like you said earlier, I'm a bit skeptic about the girls that they're showing as opposed to the girls that they took. I haven't heard anything from any of the parents from looking at this number of girls, who looks about somewhere around 100 and 150 girls maybe, to say that they see their children, which is unusual because most parents would immediately, after seeing these pictures, I mean, even the government put the picture on still and try to at least get identities of as many of the girls as they can, because even though they're covered appropriately in their cultural garb, their faces are not covered.
Yeah, and I just want to say my doubt came in because they were perfectly dressed, and who dressed them, and those women who, if the women did supply the quote unquote Muslim garb, we need to definitely hold the women accountable for this. But also, it didn't feel to me as if these were the girls. So I didn't believe it. But I want to jump to Taina because maybe you've met a lot of victims, and are they used as ransom this way, and that the identities are switched? What has been your experience when it comes to young women and the people that won't free them?
Well, thanks for having me. I would say that as tragic as the story is, the good news about this story is that there's publicity around it. 20 years ago, that would never have happened. I've been working on all forms of violence and discrimination against women and girls around the world for almost 2 decades, and it's wonderful that we have an international community that is concerned with something that happens every single day to women and girls in this country and around the world, and namely that either whether it's forced marriage or being sold into sex trafficking, or, you know, there's a whole slew of reasons why women disappear. In terms of the video, as you mentioned, it's not been confirmed. It looks highly suspicious as to whether these girls are in fact the ones who have been abducted. But you know, the messages from the so-called captors are very interesting, because it's not just education. Yes, the militants do shun any type of education for girls, but you know, they are kidnapped because they are girls, because they are female, because they are second-class citizens, and because there is I don't think they expected this international outrage, because again, it happens every day. So again, I think as an international community, it's critically important for us to keep up the pressure with the government of Nigeria. We always say if there was political will, we would be out of business tomorrow when it comes to ending violence against girls.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. With political will? Can you repeat?
If governments had the political will to prevent this type of violence, to value girls as human beings, to ensure that there are systems in place to punish the perpetrators, then we, the international community of advocates, would be out of business tomorrow.
Oh, good point. And just to jump back to you, Judge, before I open it up to the panel, can you talk about some of the laws that maybe need to be enhanced or aren't working?
You have to understand, anything that makes money, it has a lot of bureaucracy. This is a $9.5 billion business just in the United States. And if you listen to the amounts of money that they were saying that they were going to sell these girls for, $12 US dollars, and the absolutely horrific thing is that if in fact they wanted to sell these girls, they could actually have them sold within hours, because the demand around the world for pedophiles is unbelievable. And so you're talking about here in the United States, with all of the legal red tape we have for even getting a passport, they still get them out of the country. So you're talking about in Nigeria, where there are not as strong laws, because you're asking me to really try to throw American law into Nigeria. It's totally different. Women are looked upon differently based on what tribes they're from, what the cultural traditions are. I think I spoke to you earlier. It's even down to when we were talking about the women being circumcised. Actually, some women believe that, the older women especially, believe that this is appropriate. So again, there's women who support Sharia law. So a lot of the times it's really difficult, because you do have women that help to perpetuate some of these ridiculous thoughts and ideas about women, because it's just culturally ingrained in their heads. And it's one of the things we want to really take, I think, heed to, that this is a lot to do with young children having an opportunity to be educated or to see what's going on around the world and say, you know what, this is not how it is for most girls, and maybe this thing that I feel that's happening to me isn't as normal as everybody would tell me, because living in these villages, they only see and know what information is given to them, and they're told what God is, they're told what tradition is, they're told what's appropriate and inappropriate. So a 12-year-old marrying a 60-year-old is, in their culture, may not be inappropriate. Of course, we know that in the United States it could never happen, but we also know we have other religions right here in the United States that perpetuate the same thing. So it varies with religions and cultures. To really give it a number, you'd have to be specific to a religion and culture, because, as you know, in the Mormon faith, not all Mormon faiths, that children and older adults being married together are appropriate. You know, and again, it's a very, very cultural specific, and even and we think of Africa as, many people think of it as a country instead of a continent, because even every country is different and every tribe is different. In Nigeria alone, you have over 110 dialects and at least 6 different main cultures, including the Igbo, the Yoruba, the Hausas, the Tivs, the Benins. You know, there's so many, and each one of them address these issues differently based on their cultural traditions.
Yeah, we definitely just want to add that we want to make sure that we put out there that the victims of this Nigerian kidnapping covered the gamut. So it wasn't just Muslim girls that we understand. It was Muslim and Christian girls, and possibly some other religions.
And that's what makes it unusual, because all the girls in that crowd are dressed in Muslim garb. So it gives you, that's why it made it a bit unusual.
Well, they wanted to just, I think, give they was wanted to say that we converted, you know, and we also understand that Boko Haram does not represent the Muslim religion.
And that's what we don't want to. We do not want to vilify
Yeah.
as a whole, because as we do that too often here in the United States, and when they think of Muslim, they just put a blanket across an entire religion, and culture and religion is totally different.
Well, especially extremist in religion as well. Let's take this around the world. We have 3 activists here, Kompalya, Gabriela, and Chelo. Talk to us about how frustrating it is that you all have been working in this area for years, and now it seems that the world has taken notice, and I'm sure you've seen case by case of some awful situations similar to this. We don't want to compare, who's worse than the other, but I know that working for years must have been very frustrating. And where are you now with this? Who wants to jump in?
Well, hi. This is a fantastic opportunity. Thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you all. Following on what Judge Sekou said before, I wanted to point out that even if this is not a case of sex trafficking, the fact that that sex trafficking is being used as a tool of extortion, as a tool of negotiation for exchange of prisoners, is really, as Taina said, putting sex trafficking in the spotlight. And it can be seen as an opportunistic moment for those of us who are working on this issue. But at the same time, hello?
Oh, I think we need Judge Sekou.
I'm sorry. I thought I put you on mute. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's no problem. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that it's a fantastic moment for all of us to realize how prominent the trafficking in human beings is, that now terrorists are making and using it as a tool. And I think if we look at that, we have to realize that much more needs to be done. And I wanted to mention a couple of things that I've been researching lately, which are really amazing. First of all, Nick Kristof at the New York Times Sunday column was mentioning that there was the main reason why this is happening, and you were saying culture. Yes, it's culture, but it's also education that goes with the culture. Mm-hmm. How do we break those traditional cultures that prevent women access to education? So Nick was saying sometimes, well, there is one main thing that happened when President Obama before he came to office, he promised that he was going to establish a $2 billion global fund for education, and that has not been met. And I think
we conveniently forgot about that.
Yeah, we should all make a campaign for that. I mean,
got to bring that back.
Make a campaign for, I think that's super important, because education is the first step to solve this issue of violence against women, especially education of girls, which is, of course, and I know it because I've been working in underdeveloped countries for a long time. So that's one very important point that we see. He also said, Nick Kristof, I love that quote, that it's not so much drones, but it's the lack of education what is really creating this violence against women. And also, one thing that he was pointing at that I found that is fascinating, there is a new act that has been introduced, and this was an act that was sponsored by Democrat Janice Sharkowski in November. Is the HR 3571, International Violence Against Women Act of 2013. It has yet to be totally passed or implemented, but it's a huge step. And this act, I think, is a fantastic act in the sense that it really asks for the countries that the United States deal with to be responsible in her approach to violence against women. So any donor state or donor organization, grantees of the United States, have to make a huge effort to really create prevention against violence against women, for example. Now, I wanted to ask if maybe some of you have read this act or are familiar with it. My only concern there would be what would be the response, because the act is based in how are we going to respond? hone to the lack of prevention of violence against women. So that could be a little difficult for a person like me who don't believe in military intervention as a solution. How are we going to address that and make sure that the countries start implementing this this policy of prevention of violence against women?
I want to throw that. I want to put Kompalya on the spot because she's in the streets, with this every day. I don't know. Do you feel that a law or laws are working? You're out there, trying to save the girls there in Thailand. Do the laws work? Is it preventive? What's happening?
I think that's such a good question in regards to if it's working. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Before I answer that, I wanted to address one thing, that the news that we're receiving here in regards to what's going on to Nigeria is really highlighting the religious aspect. And I really wanted to ask the judge, how come no one's focusing on the aspect of a lot of Nigerian selling women to Italy? That hasn't come up at all. I mean, that has been going on for years. A lot of Nigerian women being sold or going into Italy as being trafficked or as prostitutes. As far as it goes in Thailand, there are laws in place to end trafficking. It really, in some ways, being out on the streets and conversing with the women, it really comes down to each individual woman. And I say that because a lot of them come here and they're coerced to be here thinking that it will be a better life. And a lot of them are scared. As soon as they arrive, a lot of them are in debt bondage. So debt bondage basically means that your passports are being confiscated and you're already told that you may have a 2.5 million Thai baht debt to repay before you even released, before you can even see your passport again, before you can possibly go home. It comes down to each individual woman to speak out. It comes down to each individual woman to say, I'm tired of this. And we know that there's a lot of fear placed on these women, not just with the debt bondage, but their families could be threatened as well back at home, depending on where they are. So we have a lot of international women that we deal with here in Thailand, besides Thai women who are trafficked. We have a lot of women from the Uzbek community, a lot of women from Russia, from Turkey, from Kenya, from Uganda, and Tanzania. The list goes on. From here alone, it's already increased to a $1.2 billion industry from Thailand alone, just to give you some numbers. And it really is coming from women who are impoverished, uneducated, and looking for a safe haven to create some sort of capital or economical means for their families back at home from the experiences that we are having. A lot of the women can return home if they are open to telling us about their situation. There are anti-trafficking laws in place that if a woman does want to return home, the government here will assist them in doing that. The other issue is once they have returned home, what are the educational programs in place so these women do not return to the same position that they have been? And that is also lacking. So yes, we can help them on this side of the globe, but when they return to their respective countries, the other issue is what is in place. And sometimes there's nothing, depending on the country, depending on, the township or the village where they actually come from. So I think it's also having the preventative means, but making sure that from our standpoint, when these women return home, that there's a base there. There's a safe haven for these women, so that they know that they can be educated in different ways so they don't have to return to this line of work. The beautiful thing about Nightlight is we have Nightlight, the organization, and we have Nightlight Design. And what we basically do is we allow women to come to us to be trained in making jewelry, to be trained in some sort of skill so that they can earn an income for themselves, so they can feel comfortable and economically viable so they don't have to return to the streets. And that's one.
Can I just a short comment? I think one of the things that we fail to recognize, the elephant in the room, and that's our president is in a very precarious position. One, they still haven't gotten over the fact that he's really an American and not an African, and only but by the birth of his father. So, and of course, you got the other radicals that think he's a Muslim. So, how this is addressed,
Which again, why is that a problem if he is or not? You know,
it should be a problem.
I understand, so that
It shouldn't be a problem. But what happens is that we will get caught up in that ridiculous conversation and get thrown off of the issue, and that's that these women are there and needing our help. So how much effort he gives, and I guess I heard one of the young ladies says she's not really for going in with force. It's a point of they're not going to just let these women go. They would probably kill them before they just let them go. And I really don't believe that they are going to give an even exchange for prisoners, because that's not the reason that they said that they originally took the women. That's something that's evolving every day. It seems like a different reason. And again, we can't put our laws here on the United States and put them in Nigeria. It's not applicable. We have, of course, our laws here that supposedly prevent this kind of trafficking, but they're brought in under different guises. They're brought in as housekeepers and nannies, and then they get here and find out that is not what really is the case. They have no family. Their family, they're probably thinking that's one less mouth they have to feed, and they give these their children over for domestic reasons, and thinking that they're going to make their money and make their their American dream.
Yeah, a ruse, a ruse. They're brought in under a ruse. But
on the flip side of what's happening right now, we kind of have our hands tied as the president in making his decision on exactly what kind of help do we need. Financially, it's not going to go to the girls, or do you really want to finance the Nigerian government, which I hate to say is pretty corrupt, and you never know where the money is going to go. Do we really want to send in our men and women, servicemen and women, into that fight? And I can tell you, if we do, the first thing that the crazies are going to say is that we're fighting for the Muslims, because that's all they're trying to make this into here in the United States. And that is going to be, and that's the fine line that you're not going to hear that on the news so much, but it is a thought behind that, nobody just wants to come out and say.
And then I think that this is really bringing light to the fact that so many Nigerian women are being sold into Italy. A lot of people are not addressing that at all. That's been going on for years.
You're the first I'm hearing of that, so I'm glad you brought that out, because then maybe we can put Italy on watch. And then Taina had a point about who's not being talked about in the in these laws. Taina, you were saying, what about the pimps?
Yeah. What Kompalya's work is really amazing, because what she's doing is reaching out to the victims and the survivors. And what we're seeing now around the world is this growing survivor movement. Survivors from both sex trafficking and the commercial sex trade who are speaking out and really engaging in policy. And what they're saying, and what we're saying as advocates, because we're not direct service providers at the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, is that it is critically important to look at the demand. And the demand is a very long spectrum from the traffickers who actually try to feed the demand, to the procurers and the pimps, and all the way down to the buyers of sex, which few people talk about. Now increasingly in the US and around the world, and Sweden has a law called the Nordic model, where you focus only on the buyers of sex and not the prostituted people. So only the men, since they're overwhelmingly men, are criminalized for purchasing sex, and the women deemed victims are not. In terms of Nigerians in Italy, CatW has a remarkable partner called Aroko, based in Turin, who works solely with Nigerian survivors of sex trafficking into Italy. And there are a number, I think there's another group in Rome. So we have known about this, but again, it goes back to impunity and it goes back to government inaction because, again, and the last thing we want is an us versus them. I always say, there are harmful cultural practices against women and girls around the world, and our harmful cultural practice is exploitation in the sex trade, where sexualization of women, purchase of women in the sex trade is part of our culture. And so as a result of that, there is very little investment, either legally, judicially, economically, to really look at this issue of sex trafficking and exploitation of women as a holistic phenomenon.
Also, we had brought up education earlier, and I wanted to bring perfect point to bring in Gabriela Böhm. I'm sorry, whoever I interrupted just now, but I wanted to say that Gabriela did a film called Raquel, a Marked Woman that is making the rounds. I've watched it. It was early 20th century Argentina, and there's focused on one woman, but it exposed a whole trade. This woman was an adult, married with 2 boys, very educated, a businesswoman. And so she had her education, but this torrid world that she ended up in, it was just amazing how the education was there, but Gabriela, the downfall and the re-entry into sex trade, talk about, I don't even know how this is possible.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I just wanted to follow up on Taina's point about how the incredible demand can produce this, more and more trade. I mean, in Argentina or in South America in the early 20th century, prostitution was legal, but that was not, having prostitution legal did not procure that there would not be trade. So there was a large. I am a storyteller, I guess, and this is I'm not such an expert on the sex trafficking in general, but my focus was sex trafficking in the 20th century in South America, and it's one woman's journey out of 1,000 women who were, entrapped by an international Jewish crime sex trade slave organization. Everything that Kompalya is talking about how they took their identities and they forced them to pay the debt, and this has been going on. This cycle of sexual slavery and human trafficking has been going on for many hundreds of years, and what is terrible is that it has not decreased. In fact, it has increased, and it's just it's in her story, Raquel's story. What is beautiful is that she is an educated woman, and she is pushed by her own family to become a prostitute, because that's the only thing she can do after her husband dies and her children are left behind, and she needs to take care of her family. So she goes on this route. She is entrapped by a pimp. She pays her debt. She releases herself. She begins to find a way into a more normal life when they find a way to entrap her back, because they do not want her to be a role model to other young women who could think of this idea of becoming free. And so they entrapped her again by marriage, which by Argentinian law, it was the husband would be the owner of everything, hers and whatever she earned. And they put her back into the brothel. She has enough courage to stand up and go to a judge who looked favorably at the situation, even though the whole environment, as we know from Thailand and other places in Nigeria and the United States, was corrupt. It's the demand, the economic reality of the situation is just what drives this illegal trafficking. And so there was one good judge, one good police commissioner, and her testimony is what was needed to bring the organization down and dismantle these power structures. So her story is one of very few who end up on a good note.
Well, but her boys never knew that she was involved. So she actually ended up protecting the next generation, which was amazing. But again, the fact that prostitution was legal there, I guess that's not unusual, right? Except for here in the United States. Am I wrong? In some countries that it is legal.
Well, I wanted to point out that the reason why the demand for prostitution was great. There were a lot of immigrant men who would arrive in South America, and they would arrive without their wives, without their family, and so there was a huge male population that was looking for prostitution. And there was also, it's a Catholic state which looks favorably at prostitution as a way of maintaining the family unit intact.
Wow.
And then the fact that it was men would marry these women and would enslave them for life.
My goodness. We have Nigeria chiming in. I just want to read from Victoria, the executive director again for Spaces for Change. It's a youth advocacy group in Nigeria. They are changing the minds of youth. As we know, a large part of the population around the world now, I think figures are at least half, more than half, are 25 and younger now, and so we definitely need some direction. So Spaces for Change is a fantastic organization. Victoria Ohaeri is saying that there are 3 major factors fueling the security crisis in the northeast of Nigeria, and they are, first, the uncertainty of the perpetrators. Second, the uncertainty of prosecution, and the uncertainty of justice would be the third. All of these boil down to impunity and government inaction. So thank you for that, Victoria. And she also says we do have the Child Rights Act at national level in Nigeria, and at least most states in the country have enacted their child rights law. So we got to make these visible. I just want to throw in here that something I was thinking about earlier today is the image that is portrayed. Kidnapped girls of 200 plus put a certain image in our minds, and that set us in a certain direction. But when we hear the words child bride is such a nice word, and it bugs me so much to hear child bride. They're
pedophiles. They're just using the word that they think is not going to be most stabbing at you.
Yeah, and I understand that maybe that is a practice, with the dowry and everything in the family, they are in dire straits. I mean, I understand why there might be some justification, but to use that word, sometimes we just brush it off and say, oh, okay, well, there's child rights, but a lot of these girls are being raped and put in situations that they do not want to be in. Any comments on the imagery that is out there, especially from our filmmakers?
Yeah, I wanted to say that in this same International Violence Against Women Act that is trying to be passed here, one of the issues that they address, which I think is a great improvement into the anti-trafficking laws that we have, is early and forced marriage of the girl child, because among other things, it increases the risk of maternal death and morbidity, infant mortality and morbidity, obstetric fistula, and sexually transmitted diseases, including HIV and AIDS, apart from perpetuating poverty, etc. So the impact is huge in our girls, and I think the balance, as Judge Sekou was saying later, is how do we address endemic cultural dysfunctions in societies around the world without imposing our frame of our point of view as Westerners.
Right. I think that's going to be the biggest issue.
Yeah, I think there is a parallel with the female genital mutilation issue here. that is so ingrained in the culture, and yet once anybody in Africa or in anywhere in the world has access to education, they start questioning that, and they start maybe changing their mind.
But
So,
when
That's interesting because there's a lot of women who actually are educated and still prefer that practice. There's a lot of women in Egypt who are quite educated and they actually go to doctors.
we're talking about FGM here, right?
Yes.
But
go ahead.
can I just intervene? That is, you know, when we talk about women adopting patriarchal values, that happens around the world. There is a system, and it's called patriarchy, and the goal of patriarchy is to keep women subjugated as second-class citizens. So, you know, the fact that women adopt their own culture is because we all want to be part of a particular group. We all want to belong. And so it takes for very brave women to step out of their culture and recognize that these are human rights violations and harmful to their daughters. And to go back to your issue about terminology, Nicole, which is a very important one because it does conjure our images as you know, consumers of mass media. Just like child bride, you often hear in the media terms like child prostitute or teen prostitute. Right. That is not acceptable language. We are talking about sex trafficked children by law. Any person under the age of 18 who is in the sex trade is by definition a sex trafficked victim, just as any child under the age of 18 who is forcibly married and then, you know, obviously certain states in the U.S. allow marriage depending on whether you're 14 or 16, depending on the state, but nevertheless we are talking about child rape and child abuse. So again, terminology is very important.
Agreed. I wanted to ask if we are not focusing enough on the fact that I'm hearing the reason for this kidnapping, and then let's, you know, take it around globally, is that a Western education is being given to the girls. That word is thrown in there, Western education. Now, I would agree in being educated in the U.S. that I don't hear enough about global education, so I really don't need the classics to just be from England. I know there's classics that, you know, literature that came out of Africa. I wish I had more when I was growing up. So I agree that we need a more global perspective. But is there a real problem in that local geniuses and artists and authors and literature is not being taught enough? And is there justification in saying that the education system is off and we're pissed at that? I mean, I'm just throwing some, you know, ideas out here.
I think when we're talking about education, I mean, as much as we want to believe we're the most loved country in the world, it's probably the least in some of the countries that are having these issues. And they really, when they speak about Western, and what they really are saying is we have so many organizations for women, specifically for women and the empowerment of women. And what they try to do is they cross that with religion, and then it looks like you're trying to indoctrinate your beliefs on them when one really has nothing to do with the other when you're talking about holding women in bondage. It goes to what the woman's position is in the home and what the woman's value is in the relationship between a man and a woman and the husband's rights over the women. It's more than just taking the women. You're talking about, like I said, we cannot set aside the culture. It's just like we can go back to slavery. I mean, the Spaniards didn't just roll up on the continent of Africa and just take Africans and they take us all over the diaspora. Africans sold Africans to these different countries that brought us all over the diaspora. And it's the same thing that's going on with these girls. At this particular case, it just looks like this particular group went in and abducted 278 girls. My mind, I'm still trying to grasp, how do you take 278 girls without massive buses and I mean, could you imagine 278 girls screaming to the top of their lungs? And not, you didn't find a bevy of dead bodies of girls who fought against this abduction. There's something about this abduction that we're not getting, because it was
there was some cooperation involved, is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, it was just too easy to be able to take that many girls, and none of them fought. No, you didn't hear about any dead bodies of them having to kill. I know some girls would fight for their life. Most women would fight for their life if they knew that they were being taken for such a reason. And there was not a casualty that I heard about in any of the news. It's as if they all just voluntarily got onto these buses. And it's not like we're talking about an insurgent group with a lot of money. How did they transport this many girls? I mean,
well, yeah. I mean, the
questions that make this whole thing look a little skeptical. And I'm telling you, the United States, we have enough time trying to deal with the bureaucracy of people who are legal here and staying here. They really don't want to talk about, us going in and getting these girls and then bringing them back here for safety, because they're so worried about, they may stay here. So, we have our own prejudices and issues that, they're not going to talk about. We're going to act like, we're very concerned, and of course this is wrong, and we want to give them as much help as possible. But what help is it? I mean, the president said that we have offered help to Nigeria and they have accepted. What is the help that we have offered? What have they accepted? We have not heard any of the particulars.
Yeah, I think we could only go so far because of our political history with them. And when politics comes in, then we go back to originally what Taina was mentioning. If there were political will, we wouldn't be here. So yeah, it's true. Solutions, guys. What are the solutions? I know each of you have been working again a long time in this field. What are we to do now? We've been marching, we've been tweeting, we've been rallying, we've been writing our Congress people. Thank goodness many countries have stepped up, and they are in the room now that Nigeria has accepted help. That was not the case in the first couple of weeks. What are we doing? Because this is global. This is not just Nigeria. This is global. What do we need to do for the sexual slavery that is next door, as we said in the title of this piece tonight?
I really wanted to ask, what does everyone feel about educating men? Before you had mentioned educating women.
I'm for it. That's something I do, so I'm for it. Continue.
I think Gabriela's project is just wonderful. An educated woman who has to then go out and sell herself. And we realize that here in Thailand as well, that we have some educated women from different parts of the globe who end up in this situation, who become victims of sexual trafficking, enslavement. I feel that the pressure needs to be on, in my view, more on the men, on the people who are purchasing women for a night, a day, a year, whatever it is, because we see every night that you have 18-year-olds, 22-year-olds, married men, single men, some men even coming in with their wives and girlfriends to look at a peep show or to purchase someone for a night. So I really think it comes down to educating the men. We have high school students. When high school is out here, we have high school students that will show up on a place called Nana Plaza. There's lots of places, but there's one place we service called Nana Plaza who will purchase a woman for a night. It's not just the Western men. It is the Asian men. It's a global phenomenon, as we know. But if the men aren't educated, if they don't become sexually mature or aware of the choices that they are making, I think that this will forever continue. I love the fact that the organizations I'm working with, and also Freedom to Walk, want to penetrate the system of educating women. But we cannot neglect the men. We cannot neglect their sexuality. We have to question them. And I also think it begins at home. What are these fathers implementing to their sons? How are they raising their sons to think about women and about sexuality? Because quite frankly, when I walk down the streets of Bangkok at night and you hear a man negotiating a price as low as 800 baht for a night, I cannot tell you what it does to me. and I have to keep on walking. I can't intervene by myself. I cannot tell you what it does to me. So I really feel in this brief message that we must educate all men. Some of these men are married, some of them are diplomats. It runs the gamut. They can be our cousins, our uncles, our brothers, our nephews, our sons. They are buying these women. I really believe it's about education, and also understanding that educated women are also selling other women.
Yes, that's my point. When we women are perpetuating this, it makes it much more difficult. And I mean, women. I mean, if you notice, this panel is all women. You know, for men.
That might be my fault. Like, go ahead.
I don't think. I mean, for me, outside of England, the largest number of Nigerians outside of the country of Nigeria is the United States. And I have done a lot of what you call refereeing between different ethnic groups here in New Jersey for like the Igbos and the Yorubas, and I've asked them, you know, I mean, what are you doing? I mean, I've heard of every group in the United States, you know, taking a stance. The one person that I saw on CNN, Nigerian, was from England. We have so many Nigerians here in the United States, but when they get here and they you know, they get their big house and they're all about education. Don't get me wrong, doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs. But they still of their own culture. They stay within their own groups, and so
well, there have been some leading protests in some of our boroughs in New York, though.
They're starting. But again, how many weeks is this going out? I mean, realistically, when we're talking about if these men that have captured these girls are as diabolical as they want us to believe, you know, it's been going on 3 weeks. We don't know that the girls that we saw are the girls, like I said, that were actually captured. And to me, if we have drones in the United States that can pick off a one man in one truck, you think that if the kind of help that they really needed, that we could not put a drone over and find out at least where they are, even if we didn't strike? You know what I'm saying? Of course, you don't want to kill anybody. We have the ability to, I mean, even though they're in dense areas, we went into the deepest of rabbit holes to find Osama. This is not something that the technology of the military around this country, if they really wanted to find 278 girls, my God, you can't just hide 278 girls. It just boggles my mind that we're drinking the Jim Jones Kool-Aid and thinking that if they didn't really want to find these girls, that they couldn't do it in a matter of 24 hours. We could do it.
We are definitely being, I would agree, Judge. I think we're being a little too cordial with our relationship, you know, to the Nigerian government.
And to be fair, and I wanted to make sure that all the ladies are aware, I've stepped down from the bench because I don't feel, I was there 7 years, I was a lawyer for 14, and I believe that my best work is done with the freedom of being able to do. See, when you're held by shackles on the bench, you have certain laws and things that you have to abide by. My purpose now, as I'm speaking to all of you, is wherever I can be to be of the best service, either it be through education of men, women, or just our community here at home is really not where you're going to get the biggest help, because they're not priorities in the United States, and that's just the bottom line. These are not American girls. And there's too many. We
still have American girls in trouble, though. That's
we do. I mean, we have 300,000 American girls in trouble by statistics. 300,000 here in the United States, and more than half of them are between the ages of 12 and 14. So the number is massive. But remember that the Indian couple, they were both doctors. They had 3 girls in their house for almost 15 years, who worked and cleaned and took care of their kids, enslaved, before one of them was in the grocery store and decided to run after 15 years. So this is going on by educated men and women, husbands and wives together, are holding women in captivity. Americans, I mean, we're not even going to talk about the young girl who was held from, what, 12 to 25, only 30 miles from her own home? I mean, so we're very hypocritical to think that it's not happening. We just do it more sophisticatedly here in the United States.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's awful. Taina, in your experience, what are some of the solutions that are working? I'm sad that we're still doing this work, but help us out. What do we need to do more of?
I would echo Kompalya, is that you have to educate men. You have to focus on demand. I would also say you follow the money. I mean, we are looking at a $34 billion enterprise in human trafficking, both for labor and sexual servitude. And so there are a number of people who are profiting from this, from organized crime to legitimate businesses all the way down to pimps and brothel owners. It's an issue that is hidden in plain sight. So we have no excuse not to call on our governments to accelerate change and end impunity for this terrific, horrible, horrific human rights violation.
It's $9.5 billion yearly in the United States alone, and the pimps average in income between $150,000 and $200,000 a year. That's business. That's educated businessman money. So you're talking about taking money from a majority of men, and we're talking about educating men. So you're trying to say we're going to educate them, but we're going to take the money from them. They're going to protect their interests, and they'll let us go in to a certain extent, and then you cut off like anything else. If you think that, for instance, that we can't cure the common cold. If we cure the common cold, half of the drugstores in the United States would shut down, because that's what's mostly bought on a daily basis. So if this is all about money, like you said, it's all about money. But if it's not,
I didn't say it was all about money. I said you have to follow the money to look at the issue more holistically.
Yeah,
so
but I think
I mean, we're in the 21st century, to quote Vanita Carter, who's an amazing survivor leader from Minnesota, and she says we're in the 21st century and we're still talking about the buying and selling of human beings. And human beings, by and large, 80% of them are women and children. Yes. And so we have the information. It's not accurate information, but we do have enough information to put a fire under our governments and to get them serious about targeting the demand and targeting the traffickers and targeting the pimps, which they are not doing. And so I think that if we're looking at solutions from an advocate's point of view, from an attorney's point of view, from someone who works with survivors, that would be a great first step.
Again, our social media soldiers have been pushing this issue forward, and I think a lot has to do with imagery. Chelo, I'd love for you to give an insight to your project. You have a Transmedia project, which is, I hate to say a game, but a social impact game, and that it is a way to get the images out there. Tell us what this is. Having to do, you use beautiful illustrations in your work, and
thank you. Yeah, this goes a little bit in connection with Kompalya and Taina, where we are all discussing about educating men. Part of my project, and part of my problem was always, well, how to reach the younger generations that will probably not sit down in front of a 1-hour documentary on television, and they have other ways of getting their media. So I started developing this social impact video game, actually before even the Half the Sky game came out. It's still in prototype stage. I'm looking for funding, but it's a beautiful way of using the language of gaming. I was seeing my daughter grow up, and she was 12, and she was already playing games whenever she could. So I said, well, if we could garnish that power, and just speak their language, get to kids and send them certain information or tell them stories in a way that is easy to understand, easy to digest, then maybe something is going to resonate. Because one of the main things that also I wanted to mention, this is like an aside, the game is on sex trafficking and sexual slavery, and also slavery. Like the first episode, it starts in a cocoa plantation in West Africa, for example. I was very happy about this famous, I'm referring again to the International Violence Against Women Act, because it goes a little bit beyond the definition of trafficking and sex trafficking. And I'm a sex trafficking activist. I've been working on this in Asia and here in the Americas for over 15 years too. And I really want to fight that. But I think we have to also take into account that sexual exploitation and violence against women starts at home, at our schools, at our temples and churches. So I want to also add to this incredible conversation that another way that we can just improve the situation of the women is by really looking at what's happening in our houses and in our families, and how many times we parents close our eyes, we are not totally aware, we don't talk to our children in a way that really makes them aware for life. Both girls and boys, specifically boys, I think we have a big responsibility too. Like we need to introduce. Now there is like an initiative to introduce education of sex trafficking within the sex ed education in the high schools in North America, in the U.S. specifically. So we need to also introduce education about what it is for a boy to turn 15, 18, go to college, and having to go to this ritual, this passage that they have to go to a brothel. I mean, I thought this was one thing that was done in Spain 40 years ago when I was going to college, but it's still happening now in Spain, in Europe, in the Western countries.
Nevada, and New York. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to educate college students. We need to really go there with everything that's happening in terms of date raping, college raping. So we have a huge area to work and educate. And I know the money is controlled by men mostly, but I think all the initiatives that we're talking here are great. We just need to combine them and just work together, all of us, you know.
I agree. Thank you, Chelo. I also think that we presented some tools here to work with. We have laws. We have to restructure our thinking about who we're educating. Men, yes, but also the women who aid in this. And the tools that we can use, like with a social impact game, are very important. One tool I was very impressed with, I know that I've been promoting kind of the work of our filmmakers here because I am a filmmaker and I really enjoy imagery. But I thought that Gabriela Böhm, I'd love for you to jump in here. You've used yourself as an example in your work. You have a film, Passages, and in the film you were talking to your male cousin about a situation that happened to you. You mentioned you were raped, right? And you talked about it, and it was in the nice terminology of date rape, but you went on to describe the actual rape. Your cousin, I don't believe, was prepared to hear it, but the fact that you described it so vividly, I think probably stuck with the audience. It did with me. But turning the camera on yourself, using that as a tool, being that transparent, please expound on that a bit more.
Well, I believe that I believe in that we have to reappropriate our history, and I believe in telling our stories with our voices, and that's what pulled me into Raquel's story, and a woman whose voice was buried, and I was somehow a way into helping her voice to be heard. And so I believe very deeply in that whatever we hold in, whatever we hold secret, will eventually sicken us as a community and as individuals. And I feel that if I can come forward, if I can be honest with my own history, as honest and as raw as it was in that particular moment when I am talking about my own rape, then I am helping others. I'm reflecting back maybe to some other woman out there or other man out there that has those experiences, also has those feelings, and then maybe you know, it will be a way of promoting you know, our voices. You know, I feel that you know, as a filmmaker, I have a responsibility to tell stories of characters that are you know, that have something to tell us, something to educate us. And so in Raquel's story, I mean, as I am personally, I am a daughter of Holocaust survivors, and that has been instrumental in my development as a human being and as a filmmaker. And so I feel that Raquel's story, because of her own journey, reflected back into some things of mine, having been, you know, abused and sexually abused, and my own community have been hurt. So there's you know, a lot of that in my retelling of her story.
Yeah, but Gabriela, one thing I noticed was that while you were in search of your history, and you put all of this on camera for the audience to see, you did not know about the rape of the generation right before you, and that was a very interesting circumstance. And had you felt, it seemed like on camera you said, had you known that, you know, it would have directed you along a different path. So the shame and secrecy of not, and it's a horrible situation. You just don't mention it. And I know that you don't want to tell your children, but you as a child felt like, I should have known this, and maybe that would have been preventative, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting because there is a cycle, there is a generational cycle, and I feel that if I had known, or if my mother had somehow been more forthcoming about her own you know, she wasn't exactly raped, it's a story, but
her aunt, yeah, your aunt, her sister,
yeah,
protected her by being raped herself, right?
Yeah, maybe I would have been more conscious or more aware of what that I felt that there was something dark that I needed to explore, or that, you know, it came out. So, but you know, it's funny because how those things I made that film. Thinking that I would be able to clear some of my own history. And I have a son, I'm a single mother, and I have a son. And when he would turn 13, I showed him the film, and his first reaction was, how come you never told me that my grandfather committed suicide? Or, you know, or all of these things. So it's interesting, you know, we transmit all this information without really, you know, it's not a verbal thing. So as you're all discussing how we can change the course of this cruel and horrific fate of so many thousands of women and children and men, I think that you know, we need to become more conscious, more aware of how we behave in the world, how we talk, how to, you know, and I think that's I'm not sure.
Getting into that intimate moment with our loved ones where the trust is there enough to share some secrets, to unburden ourselves, not selfishly, but hopefully to steer them in the right direction, and know that you, as a survivor, you know, you can come through this and possibly avoid situations, or be a little more aware. I don't know how to avoid sex trafficking, but you know, because I mean, from watching the Raquel story and all of the examples that you guys have seen in your work, there are many, many different ways for this to happen, but I know that we all have to be there for each other, so we definitely have to look out for our neighbors, our sisters, our families, our friends. I think that there's more to discuss, and unfortunately we don't have time, but we'll probably be back with more on this until they return. Bring back our girls. Let's keep talking, everybody, and please visit us at an Epiphany Conversation on Google+. We have a Google+ community page, an Epiphany Conversation. Please join. Find us at eConvo all over Twitter. And Facebook at Nicole Edits. Get in touch with me, and I'll put you in touch with this community and our fantastic panel tonight. I really appreciate everyone and all of your thoughts. Thank you so much, and we'll see your comments on YouTube. and come back with more. Thank you, everybody.